This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
We are hitting the road this summer in the mobile studio to meet innovators and to record new episodes of Killer Innovations. While we are away, we will be replaying some of my favorite episodes from the archive. Enjoy. Now, this week's podcast, I'm going to focus just on innovation via mergers and acquisitions. Now, there are primarily two types when I talk about innovation from M&A. One is acquiring outright a company. That includes all of its assets, its people, its intellectual properties, its current products, customer list, sales force, etc. The second type of innovation from mergers and acquisitions is the case where you purchase the intellectual properties, patents, products. You may just acquire a product line. You may acquire a team, a group of individuals with core expertise. So those are the two primary types, acquiring an entire company or purchasing IP. Now, innovation from mergers and acquisitions has both pros and its cons. Pros, you get into the market fast. You don't have to wait for multi-years and multiple decades of R&D. You can acquire somebody and immediately get into that market. It also has reduced risk. You're typically doing these acquisitions after the other company has proven out the technology, products, customers, they have a revenue stream, and therefore it becomes attractive. Now, one of the first cons I want to talk about, though, is that with that reduced risk comes lower returns. It's hard to get a return when you pay money for an acquisition because the other company has taken all that risk and rolled it into the R&D. The fact that you acquire them after they've proven it, therefore it's lower risk, inherently you get a lower return. The other con is that innovation via mergers and acquisition can make an organization lazy. That reduced risk is seductive. You don't have to run the risk of having a project blow up in your face and then try to have to explain it to your boss as to why it didn't work out. And many executives will fall back on mergers and acquisitions as one of their preferred methods, again, because this reduced risk, and nobody ever wants to have, quote, a failure attached to their name. They never want to have to explain to the boss or to the board as to why an innovation or an R&D program didn't work out. So this avoidance of risk can be very seductive. The other con is that it can be very expensive. You can't get home runs regularly on an M&A type of an approach. Just as I talked before about reduced risk means lower returns. Some people have this false hope or false sense of, I'm going to buy it just at the right time and I'm going to maximize that benefit. You may get a few lucky hits on that, but inherently innovation that results from M&A, meaning you're acquiring some unique capability and having that play a huge upside in the near term, is very, very hard to do unless you acquire them when there's still a significant portion of that risk. So when you do the M&A, meaning when do you take additional risk, is directly attributed to then the returns that you can potentially have. But again, it gets back to that risk, meaning the risk of it not working out. And typically, most senior executives want to try to minimize risk. And in many cases, they're willing to trade off upside potential in order to reduce that risk. Now, let me get into a little more detail about addressing this comment about organizations becoming lazy with an M&A approach. Now, the most common reason for M&A as R&D, meaning I'm acquiring a company is in relation to my innovation strategy, is the fact that in most organizations, they have failed to foresee the trend. Some new trend emerges and the organization just totally misses it. Never saw it coming. They get surprised. And what do they have to do? They have to go out and acquire a company in order to get into a space that they should have been in. The other case is they saw the trend, but they didn't believe it was going to become as big as it is. Oh, it's a little blip. These little companies are off thinking about it. And the third is they saw the trend, but were totally unwilling to invest because of, quote, the risk problem. Yes, we could have invested 5 years ahead of time. And in many cases, when you look back 5 years, that R&D cost could be upwards of 1/10 the cost of doing the acquisition today. But it was this view of the risk associated with that. So these are three of the more common excuses that I get from senior executives when I kind of poke on them pretty hard as to their M&A strategy with regards to R&D. You go back and you look at maybe the last set of acquisitions that they've done. Why did they do it? Why didn't they drive an organic R&D program? Did it make sense to do an organic R&D program? And what were how they missed the ball? How did they miss that this new area was going to emerge that drove an M&A strategy? So again, they failed to foresee the trend, meaning they totally get blindsided. It happened. That happens to everybody. You can't be perfect hitting it out of the park every time. Second, they saw the trend, but they didn't believe it was going to happen. Or third, they saw the trend, but they were unwilling to invest because of the risk associated with it. Now, M&A does work if it's proactive and part of your innovation strategy. Are you acquiring competitors to secure some kind of a key position? So are there 5 competitors in the space, and by acquiring a key competitor and coming together, you carve out a segment of that market with patents and customer base and sales force and reach and brand that would make other competitors hard to come after you? That is one strategy to drive your innovation through acquisition and finding those complementary companies that combined with yours give you added strength. The other is you acquire to gain a position in an adjacency where you have no skill, you have no experience, or you have no capability. It's an adjacency that you can see your organization eventually getting into, but you don't have the core capabilities today. You don't have the people skills. And so therefore, the acquisition is not only to acquire the innovation pipeline from this new organization, but you're building up a skill, capability, and a position in a logical adjacency that you want to get into or you should be into today. So again, M&A is worth it if it's proactive, meaning you're not all of a sudden finding yourself in a jam and you're trying to acquire companies just to drive a top-line revenue number. M&A works if it's part of your innovation strategy, and that includes acquiring competitors or acquiring companies in the space in order to secure a key position, meaning it's something that is part of a conscious decision as part of a long-term innovation program. Or secondly, you're acquiring to gain a position in an adjacency where you don't have that skills or capabilities or experience. Again, all part of a well-thought-out, long-term innovation strategy, and you avoid kind of this reactionary. Now, what I've been talking about here is primarily about the process of acquiring companies. As I mentioned in the introduction to the podcast, there is a second type of M&A activity when it comes to innovation, and that includes purchasing intellectual properties. Now, why is purchasing IP so important these days? Well, one is IP litigation, patent lawsuits is becoming more and more of a distraction to most organizations. It's becoming such a significant issue that it's a constant conversation within governments, within international trade organizations, within ecosystems, companies that co-opete, meaning they cooperate and compete at the same time. How do you deal with this IP ownership? IP, intellectual properties, patents, trade secrets are held by companies as a way of getting some form of exclusivity to the ideas that they generate following their investment. Now, for smaller companies, that's hard to do. You may go into a space and you've got a big company in the industry that has key patents. There are ways to go about this. One is you can go off and try to buy patents. They can be very, very expensive, as evidenced by the acquisition of the Nortel patents into the billions of dollars and some other recent acquisitions to just buy companies just to get to their patent pool. The other is to join a patent pool. Team up with people in your industry. Pool your dollars so no one company has to go off and buy the entire patent. You don't have to go out and acquire a patent pool just to protect yourself, but that you can go out and pool your dollars. There are these group purchases where groups come together around large numbers or pools of patents, throw money into the pot, and in exchange, everybody who throws money into the pot to acquire this set of patents automatically gets a license.
You are listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
I'm going to throw out a radical idea here. Now, this is a program that I put in place at my previous company, and if you are part of a large corporation or even a small corporation, I'd like for you to think about this approach. And that is if you are ever a seller of patents, particularly large organizations, as you build up your patent pools, you'll find patents in your offering that you no longer need given directions or changes or strategies within your organization and in the industries you serve. And it makes a lot of sense to sell those patents to others who are operating in that space, particularly given the cost of the maintenance fees affiliated with patents. However, what I would ask for you to at least think about is that if you are a seller of patents to others, write it into your agreement that prevents the purchaser from using your patents in proactive litigation. Allow the patents to only be used in defense. Why do people acquire patents? One is they want to exert them so they have some form of control, right? But that's fine for their own R&D. If they're acquiring your patents, in many cases they're acquiring patents in order to create a defense. Either they've already been sued or they have fear of being sued. So write into your agreement that prevents the purchasers from using your patents in proactive litigation, meaning they cannot go out and sue using your patents. They can only use it in defense. Why is this important and why should this become the standard in the industry? Because it immediately makes your patents unattractive to patent trolls. Patent trolls are typically law firms or individual organizations whose sole purpose is to buy patents and sue. They don't produce anything. In many cases, they're not even the original inventor of the idea, right? And these patent trolls are taking advantage of the laws and the structures and the way the patent system works to literally take money out of the innovation value within industries. So again, I put this in place. I would encourage you to think about putting this in place. Prevent purchasers from using your patents in proactive litigation. They can only use them as defense. Now, it does make it unattractive to trolls, but they are still highly valuable to others in the industry, right? You may not get as much because the trolls will bid your patents way, way up, and that can be an issue with your shareholders and your board and perception. But we need to come up with a radical approach to addressing the patent lawsuit challenges that are happening in the organization. The other is PCLs, patent cross licenses. Particularly large companies don't want to get into the business of suing each other. It's just not productive, and the only people that win are the attorneys. So you'll find that most large organizations pre-negotiate a patent cross license. I automatically get a license to all of your patents. You get a license automatically to all of my patents. We sign the agreement. It has some term, 2, 5, 10 years out. And therefore, then, that takes the whole risk of litigation off the table between those two organizations. And it also changes the conversation when we get into wanting to co-innovate. And I'll talk about that in an upcoming podcast. Having a patent cross license in place opens the door to a level of conversation because you no longer now have to get into who owns the patents. Oh my God, I've revealed something to you. Given that you automatically have a PCL in place, it changes the level of the conversation. So, innovation from M&A needs to be part of your risk, but only if it's done right. Done wrong, M&A can become the model, and therefore you actually de-emphasize the other types of the mix, meaning organic or co-innovation. If you do that, if you only do innovation by M&A, meaning you de-emphasize doing your internal R&D and not doing and avoiding doing co-innovation types of activities, what happens is those other parts of the mix are reduced and capability will be lost. Your R&D teams will not stay in place if you don't use them. Co-innovation, innovating with partners. If you don't find ways to do interesting innovation with your partners, the partners will go someplace else. They'll go to your competitors. So again, innovation from M&A, if it's done wrong, the challenge being then is that you actually destroy your overall innovation capabilities within your organization, and your returns become very, very poor because you're dependent on getting a return from a very high cost approach to innovating your business. Innovation from M&A, if it's done right, needs to be part of a core innovation strategy. You need an innovation strategy well understood and committed to from all the way up through your senior executives and your board members. If you don't have an innovation strategy, that should be step one before you even think about how do you play this innovation mix. Innovation from M&A done right also fills key areas that you strategically know are important. You've done the trade-off analysis as to what part of the mix you want to do this in. Do you want to do an organic? Nope, this one's an M&A, or this one's a co-innovation. You know that. Everybody's agreed to it, and then you begin the process of identifying the candidates. Now, it is lower risk, and you get a lower return, but it allows for you to be part of that strategic discussion as part of your innovation strategy, and therefore can become part of the mix of offsetting risks against high-risk innovations that you've identified as key being strategic to your group. So hopefully this gives you a good understanding of how I think about innovation via M&A. I'm sure you've had your own experience within your own organization. Some organizations, particularly over the last 5 years, have just gone crazy with doing all kinds of M&A at the risk or the expense of their innovation programs. And I've had lots of discussions with both CEOs and innovation leaders within top organizations. It needs to be a key part of the mix. It can't be the only part of the mix. So keep that in mind. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Please send your feedback, which includes comments, questions, suggestions for future podcasts. You can do that by sending an email to feedback@philmckinney.com, or you can go over to the Phil McKinney site, philmckinney.com, click on the Connect tab, and you'll get a bunch of options on different ways that you can provide feedback or ask questions. With the book being released, a number of listeners have asked about me doing speeches at their events or organizations or companies. Yes, I am booking speeches and appearances in relation to now with the book being out. Please, if you have interest, send me an email to events, events, at philmckinney.com, or you can go over to the philmckinney.com site, clicked on the Connect contact tab, and just drop me a note, and I'll have the team take a look at it. So if you've got an upcoming event or an organization that you think would be interested in the topic of the book, just let me know. Thanks for your support on the book, by the way. I do appreciate all the emails and comments and tweets and Facebook postings. People have been sending me photographs of the book in their local bookstore. I really do enjoy those. Please keep them coming.
You are listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network. This week, we are reaching deep into the archive and bringing you one of our most downloaded shows. Enjoy.
Since my retirement at the end of last year, I've spent the last 3 months working with companies ranging from small startups to large multinationals, helping to advise them and come in and give them some honest, unfiltered feedback on their overall innovation programs. The net result is I've started to see a common theme across all of these companies, irrespective of the size. And I've collected those down into what I refer to as the 5 biggest risks to innovation that I've seen inside these organizations. Now, these are, again, common irrespective of the size of the organization. And it's a little bit of a surprise to me, thinking that larger organizations would have larger problems and smaller organizations, being small and nimble, would be able to kind of avoid some of these traps. But in reality, it doesn't matter what organization you're involved in, you're going to come across one or more of these 5 risks, or sometimes I refer to them as roadblocks, things that get in the way from the overall success of your innovation programs. So, what's number 1? Number 1 is the existence of the corporate antibodies. Now, there's a previous podcast that goes into a lot of detail about the corporate antibodies, and in fact, there's an entire chapter in my book, Beyond the Obvious, on corporate antibodies. But what I want to talk about here specifically is the tolerance of antibodies by leadership. Every organization has antibodies, and in some cases, antibodies aren't always a bad thing. They help protect the organization from taking uncontrolled risks that could be detrimental to the company or the organization. But the fact of the matter is that most antibodies are just basically roadblocks, speed bumps, or people who are actually working counter to innovation and new ideas coming in. Now, what's upsetting to me, though, is the tolerance of these corporate antibodies by leaders. Leaders know they exist. Leaders even know who those people are, and they know that some of these people are actually being harmful to the organization. But leaders still tolerate them. And for what reason, I can't get a grasp on this. True leaders should step in and either correct that behavior or remove those people out of the organization. Because all they are is they're just basically holding the organization back from the opportunity for success. And these antibodies just tend to get built up over time. And if one person who's a very strong antibody never gets corrected by leaders, then other people feel empowered to be more like them. And you now set up a model that is actually counter to being an innovative organization. And in some cases, that kind of repetitive, nature of, hey, that person is fairly negative to ideas, yet they're successful and they've got a great career in the company. I'm going to act more like them because that's what's needed to be successful in this company. And the result is you now have a corporate antibody culture versus an innovation culture. So, number 1, the biggest risks to innovation that I've come across is this existence of the corporate antibodies, but more importantly, not just that they exist, but that leaders tolerate them and let them literally get ingrained as part of the culture. The second of the biggest risks to innovation that I've come across over the last few months working with companies is lack of patience. Everybody thinks innovation needs to be the quick fix, right? I'm getting these phone calls from CEOs and board members of major corporations inquiring about, what could be the impact of innovation into their organization. And in the process of the conversation, it invariably goes, we need a 30-day fix. We need a 90-day fix. We're desperate. Our share price is down. We're going to be late with our next generation of products, and the market's killing us. Can you come in and help? And my answer to them is you should have been thinking about this 2-3 years ago. Innovation's not the quick fix, not at least organic innovation. There's other things you can do, like innovation for mergers and acquisitions or potentially co-innovation programs that will allow you to significantly accelerate. But in reality, innovation takes time. It's patience. You need to have a robust innovation pipeline. You need to manage that pipeline. You need to keep that pipeline full. And you need to set expectations that the innovation teams, whether they be in R&D or marketing or operations, that they need to deliver on the innovation promise on a regular basis, not, we do innovation and maybe something comes out of it. But this lack of patience is really being manifested today because companies now are realizing that they need ideas. They need a pipeline of ideas in order to win or even stay in their current position. And they've ignored it for so long that now all of a sudden they want the quick fix. And that is incredibly tough to do. Now, there are some companies that I've been able to help that have had, something hidden inside their organization that you're able to actually grab, accelerate, and launch. But there generally needs to be this concept of patience. Need to set the expectations that innovation takes time, that it will deliver, but it does take time. And I've just found that everybody gets the religion of innovation when their back's against the wall, but at that point in time, they want the fix now. So there's just this general lack of patience. The third area is what I call the ambiguous process, right? Organizations want to do innovation. They want to encourage their employees to be part of the innovation programs, and they should be excited, and it should invigorate the organization. The problem is there's an ambiguous process. If some person inside the organization or some customer or somebody out in the world has an idea for your company, who do they send it to? What is the process? Now, if you can't sit down right at this moment and say, here is the process, here is the contact, here's how that idea will be evaluated, here's how we communicate back to those people who submitted ideas, then you don't have a process. Your process is ambiguous. And as soon as you have an ambiguous process, people get frustrated. And when people get frustrated, they're not engaged in your innovation agenda. The objective of every organization should be to get 100% of the ecosystem, employees, leaders, executives, partners, customers, 100% of the ecosystem engaged in your innovation agenda. And the way to do that is to be clear about what the process is, how they can get engaged in the process, how they can track your process, how they can feel like they're contributing to the process, and how ultimately decisions are made and things are funded, etc. Because without that transparency and without that process, people will just not engage. They will not participate. So no matter how hard you up there and you pound the podium or you put the word innovation in your annual report, if the process is ambiguous, people will get frustrated and people will not engage. The fourth biggest risk to innovation is what I call unprotected resources. With innovation, it does take some form of resource in the form of time, money, people, equipment to bring innovations to fruition. And the problem is that resources that get assigned typically sometimes will get pulled away, or there's a culture within your organization that says, we give people the 20% time rule, kind of the Google rule, or it used to be the HP rule where people would take Fridays off to work on special projects. In this case, the problem is that that's one person's time, and yes, you can get multiple people together, but ultimately, when an innovation is going to move forward and it's going to have the impact, you need to commit resources. And once you commit those resources, then you have to protect them. No matter how tempting or how bad things get in other parts of the organization, you need to have the discipline to protect those resources. If there's truly an innovation program that's critical to the success of your organization, you need to commit those resources and you need to go hands off. You need to let those resources focus on delivering that innovation impact. Typically what happens is you put some really good people on that, then some fire breaks out in another part of the organization. So what do people do? They reach into the innovation team and they, quote, borrow that person to go fight the fire, and then you drop them back in. You can't do that. That's starting and stopping the process. You frustrate the team. The team clearly gets the message that their work is not important, and therefore they feel like they get let off the hook of needing to be able to deliver the innovation impact. So resources need to be protected.
You are listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
And the fifth area is a poorly defined BHAG. Now, just remind you, BHAG is the bold, hairy, audacious goal. This is setting the bar high for the team such that it's really a stretch and they've got to go through and create something that's going to be really mind-blowing, something that's going to radically change your company, your industry, whatever it is, right? The example I like to use for the BHAG is John F. Kennedy putting out the BHAG that we were going to put man on the moon before the end of the decade. A poorly defined BHAG does not give clarity to the team on what constitutes success. The clearer that you can define the success, what is the goal line, and when they cross that goal line, they know they've crossed it and they know they've been successful. The more clarity that you can bring to defining that goal line in the form of a BHAG, the motivation that you inject in the team is immeasurable. The problem is that we tend to try to go vague. Oh, we need a new market-leading product. Well, there's lots of different ways that you can define markets, right? So I can say, I'm going to create a gadget, and the market segment for this is, guys who are 17 and a half years old, who have blonde hair and like the color purple. Oh, I'm the market-leading product in that category. You need to define the BHAG such that it is clearly a monumental step up to win. There is a clearly defined goal line, and that everybody in the organization is aligned behind it, right? Going back to the John F. Kennedy example, President Kennedy said we were going to put man on the moon by the end of the decade. And that was the BHAG. You knew when it was, timeline, end of the decade. Man on the moon, meaning you got a person standing on the moon. Now, what he didn't do is he didn't go through and say, oh, we're going to do it by a 3-stage rocket, we're going to do a slingshot approach to get... No, he set the BHAG, and then he let the team solve the problems in order to achieve the goal. Where I've seen more and more organizations out there is either they don't define the BHAG at all, or they so poorly define it that it actually injects confusion into the organization. Organizations that take time and really sit down and really get crystallized on what that BHAG is see some phenomenal success in their programs. So again, the 5 biggest risk innovations that I've seen over the last 3 months in the work that I've been doing since I retired, helping companies. And again, this is everything from large multinationals to 10-person startups. And the problems they've run into all fall into these categories. Corporate antibodies. Not that they exist and they're always going to exist. But leadership's tolerance for bad behavior in the form of corporate antibodies, and leaders not willing to take action to either correct the behavior or remove the behavior. Corporate antibodies, big problem. Second, lack of patience. Because of leadership's poor planning, don't put the burden on somebody else to go solve your problem overnight. Patience. Commit and get your pipeline going, and then let patience kick in to let that teams or those teams within your organizations to work the innovation programs. Third, ambiguous process. Anywhere there's ambiguity in the overall program, people will disengage. Because let's face it, innovation is hard. You don't need to make it harder on people just by having a process that's ill-defined or, there's no clarity, there's no transparency, there's no understanding of how decisions are being made. It just seems to be this random, somebody in the senior ranks randomly picks a program, and that's what we all go off and do. Need to define the process. Get rid of any ambiguity in the program. Fourth, unprotected resources. If you commit the resource, commit it. Have the discipline. Yes, it's painful, right? You know that you've assigned your A team to this innovation program, but you really could use that one person to come help solve a firefight problem at a customer site. Have the discipline. Commit to the resources and protect them. Don't let leaders or managers get in there and muddy up the issues of resources and such. Protect the resources. The fifth area, poorly defined BHAG. The better you define the BHAG, the better you're going to have from the standpoint of motivation, gelling the team together, all of them clearly aligned with those long-term objectives. And the ultimate deliverable that you get will be mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing, if you spend the time putting together the BHAG. I hope this was helpful. These are just the 5 more common ones that I've come across. These are kind of the overlaps. There are others that were very much, company specific, but I wanted to gel this down into literally the 5 that I see as common across industries, across geographies, across size of companies. And I'm sure within your organization, you're seeing 1, 2, or maybe all 5 of these. So what are you supposed to do? You've identified that, yes, we have this problem. What is it that you can do as an innovation leader within your organization? Well, one is don't try to solve all 5 off the bat. Pick the ones that you can go fight the battle. So, for instance, you're never going to win the corporate antibody battle going head on. You've got to solve the antibody problem by delivering and showing results in other parts of the organization to kind of get over the negative inertia. I would actually recommend that you focus on the BHAG. What are those bold, hairy, audacious goals that you can give to your teams that will deliver innovation results to the organization? The other one is ambiguous process. Fix the process so there's clarity within the organization. So therefore, you can get more and more people engaged, more and more people understanding how the process works. The lack of patience and unprotected resources, that requires executive leadership. It requires finding a mentor, finding somebody in a senior role who you can kind of bring into the process and have them help you put together kind of the corporate culture of patience. And once resources are committed, that resources become protected. And then the last one, which is the corporate antibodies. And that just takes a senior leader stepping up. If you are that senior leader, then step up. But senior leaders need to step up and say, what is acceptable behavior and what is unacceptable behavior when it comes to the innovation programs. So I would suggest you focus on the BHAG and the process. Those are things that you can control directly.
You are listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.